Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The child who was promised everything. Have you ever looked back at your childhood and wondered what happened to that spark, that effortless brilliance everyone once admired in you? Teachers saw it, your parents praised it, relatives repeated it like prophecy. You'll go far. You were the child who answered questions before they were finished, who drew connections others couldn't see, who seemed destined for something extraordinary. But somewhere between the applause of youth and the silence of adulthood, something quietly fractured. You look around now and see a life that feels smaller than it should. The trophies are gathering dust, the compliments have grown cold. You tell yourself you've failed, not dramatically, but slowly, in the everyday sense of disappointment that gnaws at people who once believed they were exceptional. The truth is harsh, yet liberating. The world was never designed for brilliance. It was built for function. And being functional is an entirely different skill from being talented. The child who can imagine galaxies may still struggle to fill out forms, survive monotony, or endure the blunt weight of ordinary life. When you were young, your mind raced ahead. You saw patterns others missed, felt emotions others ignored, dreamed faster than life could keep up. Those gifts felt magical then. Now they feel like burdens. A restless mind that won't quiet, an empathy that exhausts you, a vision that never materialized. You sense an invisible weight pressing down, the memory of potential unfulfilled. You ask yourself, where did I go wrong? But maybe you didn't. Maybe the problem isn't you at all. Maybe the problem lies in what was expected of you. The promises made to the gifted child. You were told that intelligence was destiny, that talent would open doors, that genius would be enough. It was a comforting lie, repeated by people who meant well but didn't understand the price of being different. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "The greater the intelligence, the deeper the pain." Only now does that sentence make sense. Intelligence isn't just the ability to see more. It's the inability to look away. You notice the cracks in people's smiles, the emptiness behind ambition, the absurdity of systems everyone else obeys without question. And the more you see, the less you belong. A sharp mind is a double-edged blade. It questions everything, including itself. It creates endless possibilities and then paralyzes you with doubt. Others act, you analyze, others move, you hesitate. You tell yourself you're lazy, but it's not laziness. It's paralysis born of over-awareness. You see too many paths, too many outcomes, and end up standing still. The world rewards those who keep moving, not those who keep thinking. It celebrates momentum, not insight, the functional triumph over the brilliant simply because they accept reality without dissecting it. You, on the other hand, live suspended between thought and action, an observer of your own stagnation. And yet beneath that frustration lies something sacred. The pain you feel is proof of depth. Shallow water is never turbulent, only the deep sea knows storms. That unease within you and that quiet ache of something more isn't a flaw, it's consciousness knocking, asking to be understood rather than suppressed. This story isn't self-help, it isn't a moral lesson about productivity or success. It's a mirror held up to the part of you that is tired of pretending everything is fine. The part that remembers being called special and now feels hollow every time someone asks, "How's life?" You're not broken, you're disillusioned. you finally realized that the equation you were given as a child, talent and fulfillment, was never true. The world doesn't reward perception, it rewards participation. But knowing that doesn't mean surrendering your mind. It means learning how to exist within imperfection, how to let brilliance coexist with the banal. Maybe what you've lost isn't talent, but illusion. Maybe what's dying isn't your light, but the false story that surrounded it. The journey ahead isn't about reviving the prodigy you once were. It's about meeting the adult you've become. The one who has survived idealism, disappointment and silence, and is still capable of meaning. If you've made it this far, it's because this ache belongs to you. So stay, don't rush to fix it, sit with it, because buried inside the pain of lost potential is the beginning of understanding. The first step towards seeing that your intelligence was never meant to make you extraordinary. It was meant to make you aware. And awareness, though lonely, is where all real growth begins. The invisible prison of being gifted. From the moment people first called you gifted, the course of your life quietly shifted. What began as encouragement became identity. You're brilliant. You're special. You'll do great things. These words, meant to inspire, slowly turned into chains made of gold, shining on the outside, suffocating within. You learned early that intelligence wasn't just a skill, it was your role in the world. It defined how others saw you and how you saw yourself. Every achievement was celebrated not for what it was, but for what it represented. Proof that the prophecy was coming true. Teachers marveled, parents bragged, the room would hush to watch you speak. And in their awe, a subtle message was planted. You are valuable because you impress. That belief grew like ivy around your heart. You began to perform not out of joy or curiosity, but out of fear. Fear of losing the light in others' eyes. Every compliment carried the shadow of expectation. Every victory whispered a threat. Don't fall behind. Don't stop being extraordinary. Being called a prodigy at 8 feels like magic. Being called a disappointment at 30 feels like death. The tragedy is that no one meant to harm you. They didn't realize that constant praise is a delicate poison. It conditions you to equate worth with achievement. Soon, love feels conditional. Admiration becomes currency. You internalize that you must earn affection by exceeding expectations. And when you stop exceeding, when life becomes too heavy, when success feels unreachable, the guilt is unbearable. You start hiding from the world that once adored you. You dodge reunions, ignore old teachers, and avoid conversations about what you're doing now. You envy those who were once considered average, the classmates who never had the spotlight, but somehow built steady, peaceful lives. They weren't burdened with the weight of being special. They were allowed to grow at their own pace, to fail without fear of humiliation. You weren't. Arthur Schopenhauer would say this is the curse of awareness, that the intelligent are condemned to suffer because they see too deeply into life's emptiness. For you, it's not just philosophy, it's lived experience. You can't help but see the absurdity of the race you're supposed to run, chasing titles, status, and symbols that mean nothing to you. And yet you feel trapped in the game, desperate to prove that the gifted child wasn't a lie. You procrastinate not because you're lazy, but because you fear that anything less than brilliance will expose you as a fraud. You sabotage opportunities because success terrifies you. It would only raise the bar again. You wait for the perfect moment, the perfect project, the perfect you. But perfection never comes, so you stay still, haunted by both what you could be and what you're not. The fear of disappointing others morphs into the fear of disappointing yourself. The voice that once said, "You can do anything," now whispers, "You should have done more." It's a loop with no exit. Expectation feeding anxiety, anxiety feeding paralysis. And all the while the world moves on, the applause fades, the attention shifts to newer prodigies, fresher faces, louder talents. You, the former wonder, fade into the background, unseen, unheard, unneeded. But here's what no one ever told you. The end of admiration can be the beginning of authenticity. You were taught to chase brilliance, but never taught to be human. To feel ordinary, to make mistakes, to exist without performing. These were things you were denied. Yet they are exactly what you now need to learn. The gifted child was a chapter, not a life sentence. The applause was never meant to last forever. What comes after is harder and more important. It's where you begin to separate who you are from what you do. You are not the trophies, not the grades, not the praise you once received. Those were reflections, not identity. The truth is simpler and more painful. You are someone who tried to meet impossible expectations and got lost in the process. But loss is not failure. It's an invitation to start again, this time without pretending. You were conditioned to believe that love must be earned through excellence. Now it's time to unlearn that lie, because beneath all the exhaustion, all the shame, all the silence, there still exists a quieter truth. One that says your worth was never tied to brilliance at all. It was always there, waiting beneath the noise of being special, the collapse of the brilliant identity. For years, you lived in the echo of old praise. You're going to change the world. You're destined for greatness. Those words, once bright with promise, now feel like ghosts. They drift through your mind in quiet moments, not as comfort, but as accusation. Somewhere along the way, you began to believe that if your life wasn't extraordinary, it wasn't worth living at all. The collapse doesn't happen suddenly. It's a slow erosion. It begins with small realization that your cleverness no longer opens doors, that ideas alone don't earn opportunities, that charm fades when the world demands results. You notice how others, the ones who never seemed that bright, have built steady, practical lives. They've learned to navigate systems you still question. They have houses, families, stability. You, meanwhile, have insight without direction, awareness without peace. The identity that once defined you, the brilliant one, the exceptional child, begins to crumble under the quiet weight of adulthood, because brilliance, without a structure to hold it, becomes a void. You start to feel invisible, irrelevant, like an echo of who you used to be. You watch life happen to others, as if through glass, and wonder why your intelligence feels more like a curse than a gift. In childhood, you were told that talent was destiny. No one explained that the adult world doesn't run on genius, it runs on endurance. Schools reward potential. Life rewards persistence. The two are not the same. You thought the applause of youth would carry over into the world beyond classrooms, but adulthood has no audience. It demands function, not fascination. You were trained to solve problems that no longer exist, praised for insights that no longer matter. And when the applause stopped, no one warned you about the silence that follows. The silence is loud. It questions everything: your worth, your identity, your place in the world. You begin to chase that old feeling again. You take on projects that promise significance. You make plans meant to prove your potential wasn't wasted. But the more you chase meaning, the more it slips away, because meaning built on validation will always collapse the moment recognition fades. That collapse is devastating. It feels like the end of the person you thought you were. You grieve not a dream, but an identity, the loss of being someone destined. You feel like you've betrayed the child who believed, and that grief turns inward, reshaping into shame. Schopenhauer understood this agony with chilling clarity. He wrote that the more consciousness expands, the more we see the futility of our own striving. The world doesn't care about brilliance, it cares about survival. For the average mind, this truth is tolerable. But for the gifted, it feels unbearable, because you never wanted to just survive. You wanted your life to mean something, and now you see the truth. The world measures value in output, not insight. In productivity, not depth. In noise, not thought. The mind that once soared now turns against itself, dissecting every failure until even existing feels like proof of defeat. Yet hidden beneath that despair lies an opportunity, though it's one you may not yet recognize. The collapse of the brilliant identity isn't destruction, it's disillusionment. It's the painful breaking of a story that was never sustainable. Maybe this version of you is the one exhausted, disoriented, uncertain, is not the failure of your younger self, but the beginning of someone freer. Because when all illusions fall away, what remains is truth. The truth that intelligence was never meant to guarantee greatness. It was meant to illuminate, even when what it reveals is uncomfortable. You see the world as it is, stripped of glamour, full of contradictions. That clarity hurts, but it's also the foundation of wisdom. What comes next isn't about rebuilding your old identity. It's about releasing it. The world doesn't need another brilliant person trying to live up to a title. It needs someone awake. Someone who no longer hides behind the armor of genius. You were taught that collapse is failure, but collapse is only the end of illusion. The world's silence isn't your punishment, it's your invitation to stop performing, to start existing. This is the moment where brilliance ends and awareness begins. The world's disdain for depth. There comes a moment when the gifted mind looks around and realizes that the world it once hoped to impress has no interest in depth. You thought understanding more would make you valuable. Instead, it made you invisible. Society doesn't fear stupidity, it fears complexity. Because complexity forces reflection, and reflection threatens comfort. You begin to see it everywhere. The loudest voices get the most attention, not the wisest. Shallow enthusiasm is mistaken for confidence, repetition for truth, and obedience for competence. You notice how people who once admired your insight now flinch from your honesty. You make a point that should inspire thought, but it only provokes discomfort. You ask a real question and they laugh it away. You realize that people don't avoid intelligence because they can't understand it. They avoid it because it reminds them of what they don't want to see. Schopenhauer predicted this alienation. He said that the greater one's consciousness, the lonelier life becomes. Awareness isolates. The more you see, the fewer people there are to share what you see with. The world wants simplicity, certainty, cheerfulness. But lucidity rarely smiles, depth doesn't trend, awareness doesn't sell. You look back and wonder when the admiration turned into avoidance. Once your intelligence was entertaining, a child's parlor trick. Now it's unsettling. You represent a kind of mirror people would rather not face. Your clarity exposes their illusions, the fragile scaffolding of beliefs and distractions they need to keep their lives bearable. You were never forgotten. You were silenced. The silence wasn't deliberate. It was defensive. You made people uncomfortable. Not by offending them, but by reminding them of the truths they try to bury under routine and optimism. You were the reminder that comfort and meaning rarely coexist. It's easy to feel bitter about that. To call society stupid, shallow, lost. But bitterness is just another trap, and it keeps you bound to the very world you've outgrown. The challenge is to understand this dynamic without resentment. The world values the functional, not the profound, because it is built on survival, not enlightenment. That doesn't make it evil, it just means your currency is different. In a culture obsessed with visibility, invisibility feels like failure, but for the thoughtful, invisibility can become sanctuary. You begin to see that being unseen gives you freedom. Freedom from performance, from expectation, from the exhausting need to prove. You can observe without being consumed. You can think without translating every insight into a product. And yet, the pain remains. The quiet ache of being misunderstood. It's not arrogance, it's longing. The longing to be known beyond words, beyond productivity, beyond usefulness. The longing to connect in a world that speaks a language you no longer fully share. It's here that the real test begins. The test of whether your intelligence will collapse into cynicism or evolve into wisdom. Wisdom doesn't despise the world for its mediocrity. It accepts it for what it is and still finds meaning within it. The goal is not to retreat into superiority, but to cultivate serenity, to live lucidly in a world that prefers shadows. You start to notice beauty again. Small, unmarketable beauty. A conversation that lingers. A quiet morning with no agenda. A book that doesn't demand only whispers. These moments don't erase the pain of invisibility, but they begin to give it purpose. You understand that the depth others reject is exactly what allows you to feel life more fully. It's sadness, yes, but also it's wonder. You once thought your intelligence was your weapon. Then you learned it was your wound, but now you begin to see it as your lens, a way of seeing reality unfiltered. And through that lens you start to perceive a truth the world rarely teaches. That peace doesn't come from being recognized, but from understanding. You will never fit neatly into a world built for simplicity. But perhaps that was never the goal. Your role isn't to be admired by it, but to navigate it without losing your depth. Because in a world that rewards distraction, to remain aware quietly, stubbornly, fully, is the rarest form of defiance. From the myth of brilliance to the peace of clarity. There comes a point when the idea of brilliance stops feeling like an aspiration and starts feeling like a myth. A story you were told so many times that you began to mistake it for your identity. You spent years chasing it, defining yourself through it, measuring your worth by how brightly you could shine. But brilliance, you've learned, burns fast. And when the fire fades, what remains is the quiet question. Who am I without the glow? At first, losing that light feels like death. You cling to old ambitions, replaying your childhood victories like broken film reels. The awards, the compliments, the awe in people's eyes. But nostalgia becomes a cruel mirror. It reflects what you were, not what you are. And in that reflection you see a haunting truth. You were never loved simply for existing. You were loved for performing. It takes years, and sometimes decades, to untangle that illusion. You begin to see that your pain wasn't caused by a lack of talent, but by the worship of it. You were raised to believe that intelligence was a ticket to meaning. Yet intelligence without understanding, creativity without grounding, awareness without acceptance, these are paths that lead only inward toward the endless echo of dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer, with his relentless honesty, once said that suffering is not punishment but the nature of existence itself. The mistake lies in believing that suffering signals failure. You thought your pain meant you had lost your gift, but it was never punishment. It was awakening. You saw too clearly to live comfortably in illusion, yet not clearly enough to live peacefully in truth. That's the space where most gifted souls wander, halfway between knowledge and wisdom. And yet, the path forward begins the moment you stop trying to return to who you were. You cannot resurrect the prodigy. You cannot recreate the praise. What you can do is begin to see your life not as a disappointment, but as a process of purification, burning away every false expectation until only authenticity remains. You start to realize that peace doesn't come from being extraordinary. It comes from being honest. To accept the limits of your mind and the fragility of your humanity is not defeat. It is liberation. You begin to live not to impress, but to experience, not to prove, but to understand. The myth of brilliance taught you to chase visibility. Clarity teaches you to embrace invisibility. It teaches you that being unseen by the world doesn't mean you are lost. It means you've stepped out of the performance. The applause is gone, yes, but so is the pressure. You no longer need to stage your existence for an audience. You can think, feel, and create for the sake of truth itself. You find meaning not in grand achievements, but in quiet integrity, in doing what feels genuine even when no one is watching. You discover that the value of your mind isn't in how much it produces, but in how deeply it perceives. The world may not celebrate that, but that's precisely why it's sacred. Slowly, the storm that once filled your chest begins to calm. The noise of comparison, the endless self-measurement, the hunger to be extraordinary, they begin to fade. In their place comes a silence that at first feels strange, then peaceful, then necessary. You realize that the clarity you were searching for was never out there in the world's approval. It was always waiting inside the stillness you feared to face. And when you finally sit in that stillness, something remarkable happens. You stop asking, "What did I become?" and start asking, "What can I love about what I am?" You stop trying to rebuild the myth of brilliance and begin to build something quieter, a life rooted not in expectation, but in presence. You no longer need to be extraordinary to be complete. You just need to be awake, fully, courageously, compassionately awake. Because the true opposite of failure isn't success, it's peace. And peace, finally, belongs to those who stop chasing light and start learning to see in the dark.